Sorry for the delays, everyone. Aasif, the very good boyfriend that he was not willing to leave his girlfriend stranded on Google campus.
Apparently you guys have figured out everything except parking, which I think is the next great Google enterprise. How to get parking on this campus. How are you guys? You pretty good? Great. Well, thank you for coming out.
Definitely.
Thank you for this. And my books are on sale over there. For some reason, incredibly cheap. I don't know why. Much cheaper than it is in real life, so get it now. You know.
Subsidized for Google Delay.
Yes, exactly.
So here we are in conversation with Aasif Mandvi. I take it many of you are familiar with his work. We're going to talk a little bit about your book, No Man's Land, today. But
No Land's Man. Starting off really well. Thank you very much. With the wrong name of the book.
These notes are not even worth their
No
paper.
Land's Man. It's a play on No Man's Land. It's called No Land's Man. So you flip it, and that's how I came up with this title, and now everyone gets it wrong.
And now none of you will ever forget.
No Land's Man.
Landsman.
Yes.
Well, what did you mean by that title?
I meant that, I've grown up in many different places. I was born in India, grew up in the UK, and then spent my high school and college years in Florida, and then New York. And so there was a sense of for me, encapsulated that immigrant journey, that immigrant experience of living in different places, having to be a constant. I think a lot of what I've done has involved sort of shape-shifting and adapting to environments, different environments. It's probably why I became an actor on some level. So that's what the title is about. Mm-hmm. Should I be looking at you or should I be looking at the camera? Because this is going live streaming right now, right?
This is going live streaming. You can,
I can do either. I can go back and forth.
If you want to deliver something,
yes.
just deadpan.
Great. I can just do that. So it's like the Daily Show. I'm talking to you, but then I'm talking to the people at home.
Wait for the third wall. Appreciate that. No, it's an interesting title. What were you hoping to accomplish by writing this book?
I was hoping to accomplish getting a really large, amount of money.
Yes.
to write the book. I wrote it because I had been. Chronicle Books approached me to write a book, and they said, "Would you be interested in writing a book?" And I had already been writing sort of monologues, essays, kind of short pieces. And everything I write pretty much has to do with my life, and because I'm incredibly interesting. And so I just decided this would be a great sort of venue. I haven't actually ever written a book before. I've written plays, I've written movies, but to write a book felt like a challenge that I hadn't taken on, and it was incredibly fulfilling, hard, lonely experience, but I'm very proud of it, and I feel like I got to tell a lot of stories about things that happened to me, but not just about me, but like on a larger cultural context, hopefully sort of saying something about the immigrant experience. You know?
No, it's interesting that you got asked to write the book, in that, I mean, I think most authors don't have that liberty of just saying, hey, I'm sure you have something to say.
Right. Well, I think it had to do with the fact that I was on a little show called The Daily Show.
Probably helped.
I think they were like, everybody on The Daily Show writes a book, and so you should also write a book. No, I think clearly there was a public platform there that I think they felt like maybe I had something to say, which, I hope I did. So, yeah.
Well, but it wasn't really like a treatise that you would expect some, Daily Show author to come off their, political pedestal and tell you how politics should be done. It was a series of vignettes about your life, and these kind of short stories, almost Sedaris-like in some sense. I hope you take that as a compliment. I do. Thoroughly enjoyed.
I'm a huge David Sedaris fan, and to be compared to him in any way at all is a huge compliment. But that's kind of what I wanted to write. I came from a theatrical background, doing theater and going to drama school and all that stuff. So for me, the personal is the political, and all stories. The best stories are personal, and the greatest plays and the greatest movies and all have to do with some form of family. And so that is kind of what I attempted to do in this book, which was really talk about my journey, talk about my family, talk about that, and hopefully resonate on a larger level.
Was there a style you were trying to emulate with the structure you went after, or is this just kind of how it came out?
I wasn't really, I mean, maybe Peter Benchley's Jaws, but I think I failed miserably in that.
I think I sensed that.
I was a whole story about how I got attacked by a shark that I took out because it was completely made up. No, I mean, I guess people like Sedaris. I really just wanted. I had written a play years ago, a one-man show called Sakina's Restaurant, which was a series of also vignettes, but done in a monologue performance style. And I wanted to sort of take that and turn it into a narrative, into a book form, right? Like into a prose thing. And but it's dealing with the same subject matter in the same general world, but just different stories and stuff. So I just really was writing the way I write, and so hopefully people will like it and enjoy it.
I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I promise we'll get to the content in just a moment, but...
You don't have to, it's fine. I'm totally happy to sit here and talk about other people's books. No, I'm
Well, just the structure of the book, if we could, a great paper.
Gatsby, it's a terrific book if you haven't read it.
It's no, actually, it was interesting. It doesn't read like an autobiography. It really has a sense of sequence, but also a sense of kind of just trains of thought. I just found it wonderful to read. It was an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you. I cringe at the word biography or memoir or whatever because it sort of is. I don't think of it that way. I also don't feel like I'm at a place in life where I'm like, I'm writing my memoir, I just feel like they are stories inspired by my life, and they're entertaining and humorous and sometimes a little bit sad. So yeah, I think they're just vignettes and sort of little snapshots of things in a person's life that hopefully we can relate to, and I mean, and I deal with some real issues of race and religion and stuff like that, as seen through the eyes of a little brown kid living in a white world. So you can relate, right, pal? Yes. Indians in the front are like, yes, brown people in the white world. Yes, we know.
Brown people who in a white world, but also one that doesn't necessarily relate to.
Although here it's sort of white people in a brown world, isn't it? I mean, in Google, kind of a reverse thing there. Yes.
Yeah, race, religion, identity, these are all definitely very prevalent topics in the book. So, were these things that you were working out as you were writing them, or did you have something to say about them and you wanted to find the right stories that captured it?
It was a combination of things. It was like I started off wanting to say something and then realized I actually had something else that I was saying, and then sort of went down that. I think I discovered, it sounds really sort of, I discovered a great deal about myself as I wrote this book. But, it's kind of, that's what happens when you write stories about yourself and your life and things that have happened to you, that you sort of hopefully gain a level of insight. Otherwise, why the fuck are you writing it? Because then you can share that insight with others, and hopefully they, gain a level of insight into their life, and that's how art works. That's how art works. And that is one to grow on. Yeah.
Do you have any specific examples of things that you learned, things where you wrote it and you were like, oh, yeah, that was profound? In those words.
I think it's dangerous whenever a writer is sitting in front of a computer writing and then stops and goes, yes, now that is profound. Most of my experience of writing was more like, what the hell am I doing? Why am I sitting here writing this thing? No one cares, that kind of stuff. But yes, I mean, there were definitely specific things where, in talking about my immigrant journey from the UK to the US, and sort of, the transitions that happened there, and, coming to New York as a young actor, trying to get work, and then even on The Daily Show, sort of talking about the experience of being on The Daily Show as at the time when I started, which was in 2006, and W was still president, and we were very much entrenched in this war, and oh wait, it sounds like today. But No, but you know what I mean? So like definitely there were insights that came out as I wrote that. Hopefully that is kind of what happens when you write.
You know, it was interesting to hear first-person perspective. You struggle with so many concepts about, you know, especially religion, feeling like your skin is labeled like a Muslim, but you don't really have that, but your parents are that, and yet you connect with it.
Right.
A lot of back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely tried to be honest about my personal relationship with my struggles with Islam. You know, I mean, I say in the book that I've been in more bars than mosques over the course of my life, and I'm no representation of a Muslim by any means. But yet I somehow got hired as the senior Muslim correspondent on The Daily Show, to which my parents were completely flummoxed. They were sort of like, why would he hire you? You don't even know how to do salam. Like, you know, like it was like, so it definitely, yeah, you know, I definitely, I mean, but that is the outside versus the inside and who you end up being and sort of the shapes that you end up taking in order to be accepted. And, you know, especially as a kid, you know, I grew up in England in the 70s. And you know, there was a lot of racism, and I went to a boarding school, you know, and I sort of dealt with like the racial stuff that was going on there, and the class stuff, and all of that, you know. And then I talk about sort of the different, you know, like I found that like in the UK when you, it doesn't matter how long you've been there as a kid growing up in the UK as an immigrant, Indian parents. In England, it doesn't matter how long you've been there. I felt like you always were a foreigner. You would always feel that sense of being a foreigner. And in America, that was the opposite was true, which was that you arrive in America and people are just like, you know, whoever, we're the 1,000 years of culture and history, then religious, but forget that, you're an American now. Just pledge allegiance to the flag, you're an American. In fact, we're going to put American before we say who you are. So you are now an American, Indian American, you know. But the thing here I found was that there was a kind of, because of, I guess, whoa, what's going on? Yeah, we're doing an interview here, pal. Mr. Indian. What is going on here? Is there free food? Oh, there's free food everywhere. It's okay. That's why there's so many Indians here, because you have free food. What was I saying?
Think about struggles of religion and so forth.
Anyway, you know, yes, sort of, yes, when you come to America, there's that sense of like, you know, you just get absorbed into this sort of Americana. I write there's a line in my book, actually, where I say, Americans think about the rest of the world the way New Yorkers think about the rest of America, which is they don't. You know? So, but yeah, so that.
Yeah. You talk, you know, a lot about your acting influences going all the way back to childhood.
Yeah.
You talk about being inspired by Omar Sharif.
Yes.
Can you talk about why he inspired you and what that did to your career?
Well, Omar Sharif was, you know, at that time, before we had Aziz Ansari, we had Omar Sharif, and you know, Omar Sharif was like the first brown face that I saw in a Hollywood movie, you know, and so for me as a little kid, like watching that. You know, my heroes were like, you know, the Fonz or whatever, you know, and I was trying to like, and I had this kind of, I would watch American television shows and I would sort of want to try to be, you know, that. And I liked the Fonz because his real name was Fonzarelli and my name was Mandviwala, and I figured we both had really dorky names, and yet he seemed to have, you know, transcended that and become really cool, so I thought there was hope for me. But then I saw Omar Sharif, and I remember that sense of like, oh, here's the first brown person, and I was kind of taken aback, you know, like I didn't know. And so there was this kind of like a weird hope in terms of like, oh, there's a possibility of actually being an actor in Hollywood, or where, you know, being an actor if you're a brown person. Because I didn't really grow up with Bollywood and all the Indian actors. I sort of, you know, all of my sort of acting heroes were Caucasian men. So. You know, that he was the first that wasn't.
Well, and fast forward to, you know, recent time, and really with this now, you know, sounds like you've actually inspired quite a few various types of brown Americans, Muslim Americans, you know, Indian descent, whatever. And so it's almost as if you've kind of, to some degree, come most of the full circle. Do you feel like this book is a bit of an homage to that, hoping to inspire other young Asifs out there?
I mean, look, yeah, that's a tough question to answer because you never really feel like you've come full circle. You just end up feeling, you're somewhere on the treadmill, kind of, trying to figure it out. But yes, I am always proud when I feel like there are younger South Asian writers, performers, whatever, who have been inspired by what I've done or have read my work or whatever. So yes, I hope when I wrote Sakina's Restaurant, there were no I grew up. So as a young actor, you go to auditions and stuff, and you would have to do a monologue and whatever, and I would always have to do something from Death of a Salesman or because there were no plays written for brown characters. There were no parts, and so when I wrote Sakina's Restaurant, one of the sort of personally most fulfilling moments was that because I created these characters for brown actors because they were brown Indian characters, that a kid came up to me one time and said, I got into grad school using one of your monologues from Sakina's Restaurant, which was pretty cool for me. It was sort of outside of everything else, that was really cool because I was like, oh, you actually had a character that you could personally relate to instead of doing Biff. You could do this brown Indian character and actually get into grad school with it. So that was,
Yeah.
So yes, that feels good.
Absolutely. Actually, so you said there were no roles written for brown people. On a much more depressing level than one that you've written on, there were plenty of roles written for brown people, given to white people.
Right.
And you called it whitewashing. I guess is a term probably used in Hollywood more.
Yeah, I mean there were, yes. I mean it's happened across. It's not just brown people, but anybody who was not Caucasian was often in early Hollywood, especially. Mickey Rooney in Breakfast at Tiffany's, of course, is the most famous kind of case of whitewashing that there is. But we had even in the '80s, you had Fisher Stevens playing an Indian guy in Short Circuit and stuff like that. So when they actually started to hire Kal Penn, it was cool. When Harold and Kumar came along, it was like, oh, okay, now we see a brown guy and an Asian guy in the leads in a film. So things have changed since when I was sort of auditioning to be a snake charmer for a commercial, which they ended up casting a white guy,
Yeah, I think you refer to that in the book as patanking?
Patanking. So patanking is a word that my good friend Sakina Jaffrey, who you might all know from the House of Cards. There's a whole bunch of people over here. I haven't not even been looking at you. Hi, how are you? Nice to see you. She came up with this term, and we used to sort of use this term when we were actors in New York, and it was patanking, which is basically when they want you to embody the Indian stereotype, and what it sounds like to them is patang, 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 patang. So when we would go to auditions, she would always say to me, how'd it go? And I'd be like, great. She's like, did they have you patank? And I'd be like, yes, they did, because they invariably were always like, could you do, nobody knew that's what it was called except us, but that was our sort of, our inside the Beltway kind of slang for it, right? Mm.
Yeah, well, although when you look back at, certainly I guess the more notable things you've done, I don't feel like you had to put on that accent. So do you feel like you've been able to grow through that as an actor? Do you still feel like you're faced with this constantly?
Well, no, I am faced with this still to this day. And I luckily I have a little bit more leverage now than I did, In fact, talking of when I did the internship, I had to do the Indian accent. And they wanted the character to have an Indian accent. And I remember going in and auditioning and meeting with Vince Vaughn and Sean Levy, the director, who were very great. But then I got a call from one of the producers of the film saying that Warner Brothers would like to hire a dialect coach for you for the Indian accent. And I said, they know that I am Indian, right? And I have Indian parents, And and they were like, no, they know, but they felt like your accent was not as strong as the other actors that were coming in. And I was like, I know. That was for a reason, because I was like, and so I had to sort of push back a little bit and be like, this guy, I'm not going to do him as some kind of stereotype of like an Indian accent. So I actually modulated the Indian accent so that they wanted the accent, but I gave them my version of what that was, and so I felt like he seemed. I remember saying to them, "Do you know the way Fareed Zakaria sounds?" And they were like, "Yes, we do." And they're like, "That's the accent I'm going to do." And they were like, "We love Fareed Zakaria. I think he's great." I was like, "There you go. That's it. It's not Apu. It's Fareed Zakaria."
Nice.
Fareed is like watching this right now. He doesn't sound like me at all. Do I sound like the guy from the internship?
No, that's hilarious.
I don't know why I just gave him Stewie's voice. I say. Go ahead.
You were raised in England. It's kind of an interesting background because I don't think anybody would have guessed that. That has probably been, I guess.
It's it's a well-kept secret.
Well, just your accent doesn't tell it at all.
Right. It's funny. I mean, people. Sometimes people hear it. Sometimes people hear. I feel like I have one of those accents where sometimes people are like, I hear it. Once I tell them I was raised in England, then they're like, oh yeah, I totally hear it. I'm like, no, you don't. You think you do now because I just told you that. But yeah, I grew up in the north of England. So I had a thick northern accent like that, really like that, Right, where are you going? Oh yeah, great, like I sound like that. And imagine if I sounded like that now. But no, but I think again, going back to the whole idea of like adapting to various different environments, I think I got to Florida and realized that nobody knew what I was talking about. And eventually it sort of. And when I was living in Florida, the combination of a northern British accent with an American accent sort of ended up making me sound like I was from Brooklyn, And so people thought I was from Brooklyn when I lived in Florida. I had never even lived in Brooklyn. And so it was really interesting because it's sort of the way it kind of melded together, I guess.
Yeah. And you didn't just move to Florida, you moved to Tampa, Florida.
Tampa, Florida, which is the armpit of Florida. No, I'm kidding, Tampa. Love you. No, it was great. I mean, that was America to me when I got to Tampa. I was like, America's full of strip clubs, really awesome strip clubs, like the best strip clubs in, and Chick-fil-A's. It's Chick-fil-A's and strip clubs. But that was sort of the America, Florida. It was kind of it was kind of what I think I thought my life would be like I'd just be hanging out with a dolphin all the time and, living on a sailboat and whatever. It was sort of, but I ended up in the suburbs, of Tampa, Florida. Yeah.
Some of the stories were kind of fish out of water to some degree, but also you embracing it much more, or rather, I guess your father embracing kind of Americanism to a degree that...
You're talking about brunch, aren't you?
I am,
yes.
A little bit.
My dad, when he first came to Florida, he called us. We were in England, and he came out on a reconnaissance mission to see if he wanted to move the family to Florida. And he called us, and he was like, "They have this wonderful thing here. It is called brunch. It is breakfast and lunch. They have a third meal, brunch." He thought it was like an in-between meal. He was like, "There's breakfast, then there's brunch, then there's lunch." And I was like, I don't think that's what it is, I Googled it. No, I didn't. There was no Google back then. People had dictionaries. No, but it was, he was like obsessed with this idea of like this brunch thing. So I remember that was one of my first, hello, how are you? They're just on their way to class. So he was one of these, first memories of America was like coming to America and then going to get brunch at IHOP or wherever, So I have a story about that actually in my book about how my father was obsessed with that.
Well, and he also addresses what he thinks is to be the golden rule of American consumption, which is like eat as much as you can.
As much as you can, eat it
nothing.
all. Yeah, because I mean, and look, the idea that America is the land of plenty. Like for him, he literally took that, literally, and he was like, let's go to Albertsons and take pictures of huge jars of peanut butter and send them back to India to make them jealous. I don't know. No, but it was like, yeah, he definitely embraced American culture with open arms and an open mouth, Yeah.
You also write about your experience in, I guess, your first star or lead role with the Mystic Masseur.
Yes, the Mystic Masseur.
What did you learn from this experience? What did that take away from you?
Again, it was one of these, so when I was doing Sakina's Restaurant off Broadway, which was the one-man show that I wrote, a gentleman by the name of Ismail Merchant approached me. And Ismail Merchant, for those of you who might not know, was the merchant in Merchant Ivory. And they made all these amazing movies back in the 80s, like Remains of the Day and Howard's End and Room with a View, and won a lot of Academy Awards. And they kind of created an entire genre of films, period films. And so Ismail came up to me after the play and was like, I've got a movie that I'm making based on V.S. Naipaul's book, The Mystic Masseur, and I'd like you to play the lead in this film. And so, it was a tremendous opportunity as a young actor. I'd never, I'd had like 2 lines on Law and Order at that time, So it was great, but it was nerve-wracking and terrifying. And he was kind of a Barnum and Bailey type character, like this larger than life. He kind of. I remember one time when I first met him, he took me to this restaurant that he claimed that he owned. But none of the waiters knew who he was. So, but he was like, I love this. This is a wonderful restaurant. I own this. And then we had like this meal, and he gave me the book, and then he said, you must read this book immediately. We are making the film, and it's going to be terrific, and blah, blah, blah. And then I didn't hear from him for a year. And then like a year later, he called me, and he was like, you have to go to London for a costume fitting. And I was like, what? I don't even know if I'm doing this movie. I haven't talked to you in a year. He's like, of course we're doing it. And he was really like offended. And so he was like, of course, why would I, And I was like, because it was a year ago. And so then he flew me to London. But the crazy thing was he was like literally one of the cheapest people. I mean, the man has passed on now, and God bless him, and I loved him. And he was like a crazy uncle to me and gave me this amazing, but he was one of the cheapest people in the world. He was, Anthony Hopkins once said that Ismail Merchant will steal the cream out of your coffee if you don't watch out. And he sent me to London for a costume fitting, and he refused to give me what's called per diem. So per diem is basically food money to eat and like take cabs and whatever. So I was going to be in London for like the weekend, and he was like, and he wouldn't give me lodging. Like, he wouldn't give me a hotel. He was basically like, he'll stay in my flat. and then my manager at the time was like, you have to give him some money to like eat, and so he got frustrated and called me over to the Merchant Ivory offices on 57th Street, where I walked in. I walk into this room where there's BAFTAs and Oscars and, pictures of him with Anthony Hopkins and Hugh Grant and, everywhere on the walls and stuff. And he's screaming at James Ivory, who was the other part of Merchant Ivory, about how Harvey Weinstein is an uncouth pig. And, which, he's not the first or the last to say that. He was screaming about this. And then I sat there for about 10 minutes while he was on the phone, and then he finally looked up and he said, okay, your manager is telling me that you have to have money to eat when you are in London. So here's what I'm going to do. So he takes out a piece of paper and he writes on it, Dear Mr. Khan, he says to me, he goes, there's a wonderful Indian restaurant down the street from my flat. And he writes, Dear Mr. Khan, please let my friend Aasif Mandvi eat whatever he would like on the menu when he comes to your establishment, signed your friend Ismail Merchant. And he rolls it up, puts it in an envelope, gives it to me, and says, you go to this Indian restaurant, he will give you whatever food you require. That means I literally only had to eat Indian food. And then he's like, but when the bill comes, remember, he's supposed to give me 50% off. So he wanted a 50% discount on this free food. So it was, that was him. But he was crazy, and then he accused me of having sex on his chair when I was. He had this idea. His house was like a, it was like the inside of Sotheby's or Christie's, you know. Everything was from Rajasthan from the 1600s. He had like, from, the Raj and stuff. And he had these antique chairs, I guess, and they were in his dining room. And I sat on them, and they broke because I was leaning back because the TV was in his dining room. So I break the chair. He has a dinner party. Some woman sits on the chair. It breaks because I have broken it. And I tried to put it back together with glue. And then he proceeds to tell the entire dinner party that me, his guest, had been having sex on his antique chairs and broken them. And I'm standing there, and everyone looking at me like, why would you do that? That's a terribly impolite thing to do. And I'm like, what? So, yeah.
Oh, man. Well, you've mentioned Sakina's restaurant a couple of times. I do want to talk about that because, it was really only showed in New York, or maybe in New York and Chicago, I guess.
Well, actually, it was we played in a couple of places. We played in New York, and then we toured around a little bit with it. We brought it to LA. We took it to London, to the Bush Theatre in London. And, I played for a couple of years. I was sort of touring around with that show. Mm-hmm. But when we did it off Broadway in New York, it was the first play about a South Asian family written by a South Asian that was done on the mainstream New York stage. And so we got quite a bit of attention just from that perspective. And I think, it was and then we made it into a film called Today's Special, which is available on Netflix. And it was good. It was good to do.
Yeah. So your roots are really in dramatic acting.
Really, yeah. I mean, I went to drama school. The whole Daily Show thing came out of left field and sort of has changed my life and has been a tremendous opportunity for me. But my love is really theater. You know, like in the same way that John Oliver goes back to do stand-up in the clubs. Where he sort of grew up. I grew up doing theater. So and also in drama school you don't think of like comedy versus. In Hollywood, they're like, you can do comedy and drama? What? They're amazed by that. But in drama school, you just you do it all. You're doing Chekhov and Moliere. Mm-hmm. Little Chekhov Moliere drop. Boom. So, yeah, anyway.
How prepared were you for this Daily Show opportunity? I couldn't get the sense of how much stand-up or comedy experience.
I had comedy experience. I had been in a sketch comedy group. I had done, I hadn't really done stand-up, but I'd done more sort of improv sketch sort of stuff. And when the Daily Show came along, the great thing for me was specifically John was not looking for a comedian, because I think they often go sort of scout comedy clubs or places like that. He was looking for an actor. And so when I came in to audition for The Daily Show, it really was for a one-off gig where they had written this Middle East correspondent character and realized, we don't have a Middle East correspondent. So they had to audition people. So I came in, auditioned, and he actually offered me the job that day. Like, I basically came in and was like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm just going to do my best Stephen Colbert impression. And so I did this impression of Stephen Colbert. John turned to me, said, welcome to The Daily Show, and I was on that night. And the weird thing was that I went out, it was the weirdest day of my life. So I walk out onto the stage at the rehearsal, because we usually rehearse around 4 o'clock or whatever, and then we tape at like 6, and at 4 o'clock I go out there, and usually in the audience there's a few producers and some of the writers and stuff, and it's all kind of very, like, everything's changing and the writing. So I go out there for this rehearsal, and I look out in the audience, and there's a guy sitting there with a baseball cap, and he's just kind of hanging out. And I am looking at him, and I sort of look a little bit more closely, and it turns out that it's Bruce Springsteen. and of course, my first reaction is, holy God, Bruce Springsteen works at The Daily Show! And but he didn't work at The Daily Show. He was just visiting. And so then I do the show, and then Bruce Springsteen comes back. So not only did I meet Jon Stewart for the first time and was on The Daily Show, I also met the boss, who came backstage and told me that I was very funny. And I told him, you're a very good singer. you're good at singing. What am I going to say?
Yeah, you've mentioned that they hired you and you were on that night. I was going to ask, is that protocol for the Daily
No,
Show?
I think I'm the only person that's ever been kind of hired that way, because I was hired as a one-off. Like, it was just going to be for that one night. And then John, God bless him, kept calling me back and just kept saying, like, hey, you want to come back and hang out and do another piece and whatever. And so I just kept coming back, and eventually after about 4 months, what I realized was that was my kind of audition period. That was my trial. And then after 4 months, they offered me a contract. And then I was there, until then, till now.
So I was going to ask, I mean, I've had a fantastic run there. I know that correspondents come in and out of the Daily Show.
I've actually been away from the Daily Show for the last 6 months because I've been doing an HBO series called The Brink, which comes out next year with Jack Black and Tim Robbins and a whole bunch of really great actors. And it's a half-hour comedy about staying in the geopolitical satire world, but it's about, it's a half-hour comedy about the end of the world. So it's sort of like if, not specifically the end of the world, but like if, like a huge global crisis. So if 24 or Homeland was a comedy, this is what it would be. So it's great, and I'm very excited about it, and HBO's very excited about it. It comes out next year. So I've actually been away from the Daily Show, so I've actually now am kind of more part-time on the Daily Show. I gave up my office, and now I'm just going to job in whenever they need me or whenever I'm free.
So now there's kind of an open role for
it is.
senior
It's
Brown
great. I mean, John,
correspondent.
and again, like John has been the greatest boss because he's let me go off and do movies, and other things, and then come back and always have a home at the Daily Show. And so this one, he was kind of like, look, you're going to be gone for 6 months. Why don't you just, because it always feels like I go off and do other stuff. And then, he was like, rather than that, why don't we just have you come in whenever you need to come in and do stuff. So you'll still see me on the show. I just probably won't be there on a full-time basis.
Interesting. Yeah, you've had some pretty great correspondent names, as they are good at it. My favorite is probably senior foreign-looking correspondent.
Looking correspondent. That was my favorite too.
You said you started out as Stephen Colbert. I got to imagine you really kind of molded this role into something. So what did you envision yourself on the Daily Show?
I never did. This is a tough question because other people have always been like, your persona on the Daily Show is so, and the thing is, I can't think about it. Like, I literally, if I become aware of that, then I am dead in the water. Because I'm just like, for me, it's just, I just go out there and try to be funny and communicate and try to like hit the jokes and do the thing. And my persona is something that just has developed organically over time. I think all of the correspondents have their very specific persona, but it comes hopefully out of an organic process. And it took a while for it to evolve, but I don't try to think about it that much because otherwise it's like it will go away or something, so I don't worry about it.
Interesting. I have many favorites in terms of scenes from your show, and you've got a couple that you've made quite a mark on the world at large in terms of, influence that your work has actually had on other people outside of the Daily Show. I'm thinking specifically of the politician from North Carolina.
Oh, right, yes, right.
Where you may have just let him say things that...
Yes.
What was that interview? I got his name.
That has become my most famous interview now, and it is, and it was primarily because, look, we do interviews like that a lot, and people say crazy things all the time. I think what happened in this instance was, here was a GOP guy in North Carolina saying the N-word and other things on national television at the same time as the GOP was trying to reach out to African-American voters in that same county. So it's sort of, and what was kind of sad about it was because the GOP, they fired him, but it almost felt like they fired him because they were like, listen, you're not allowed to say that out loud. We are trying to get black people to vote, But it was sort of like, it was kind of like that, but he was, once he got fired, then it became national news, and Rachel Maddow and CNN, everyone was talking about it. And, but that was one of those situations where you don't realize the impact. You never know. Like, you just basically go in there and let people, Stephen Colbert, again, I go back to Stephen Colbert because, he said to me when I first started at the show, he said, when you put a camera in someone's face, they get a lobotomy. And you want to take advantage of that as much as you can. And the other thing is use the silence. Like, when you don't speak, they will continue to speak. And they will fill the silence. And eventually, they will do the thing which I call I fuck the chicken moment. they will say, I fucked the chicken. And once
to-
they say, I fucked the chicken, you have your piece. That's it. Then you can just be like, I think we're good here. We got everything. Pretty much fucked the chicken. Yeah, I fucked the chicken. You know, so sometimes it takes a long time to get to the I fucked the chicken moment, and sometimes they say, I fucked the chicken right away. You know, but eventually, hopefully, if the piece goes well, they will say, I fucked the chicken. I'm just going to see how many times I can say, I fucked the chicken.
Is that at all reference to John's favorite news clip he picked up where someone's
Yes.
like, keep fucking that chicken?
Keep fucking that chicken. But yeah, you know, and it is kind of that. It is exactly that. It is like when they say that thing that they or their lawyers wish they had never said, is when you have the peace, you know, and that's what happened with Don Yeltsin, where he basically started on this whole, you know, making fun of Obama. He had a cartoon of Obama as a witch doctor, and he said he was making fun of Obama's white half, which first didn't even make any sense. And so, you know, it was sort of, once he went on that role, I knew that I just had to stay out of the way. Now it was just like, my job was not to encourage or discourage, it was just to step back and let him go. And that's what happened, and sometimes those things work out really well, you know? Yeah.
So do you have any personal favorites that you look back on? Clips that you were just...
I mean, I do. I mean, that one is obviously a favorite of mine. I also love the time I asked Governor Rick Scott to pee in a cup. We were doing a piece down in Florida about mandatory drug testing for people on welfare, and you know, it was a valid piece. But what was great about it was Rick Scott was having a press conference to announce his budget for the upcoming year, and we thought it would be great because what we realized is that like a lot of these people who were advocating this law. Because they were saying, the reasoning was that welfare is taxpayer money and therefore the taxpayer should know where that money is going, and so these people should be drug tested. But, you know, surprise, surprise, the people who are also lawmakers in the state of Florida are getting paid by the taxpayer, and so why should they not be drug tested as well? So this was our premise that we went in with, and we thought we would take it to the highest level in Florida, which is the governor himself. And so we interrupted a press conference of his with about as many journalists as are sitting in this room right now, and asked him if he would give us a urine sample. And I had the cup right there. I said, like, you can do it right now. We'll all turn around. You could just give us a quick sample. And he was not happy about that. He eventually told me, I think at first he was trying to be polite, but eventually he was like, I'm running this press conference, not you, okay? Sit down. And so even though he got mad and shut us up, we had the moment. And what was great about it was when it aired, first of all, before it aired, it made, because every media outlet in Florida was in that room. Meanwhile, none of them made a sound while I was doing this. They were just gobsmacked and sat there, afraid to laugh, afraid to do anything, because they want to get in that room again, and I don't give a shit. You know what I mean? So they're all like, "We want to be invited to this party again. We are not going to make fun of the host." You know? So they all sat there, but the minute we walked out, they came upon us like and they were like literally like, that was amazing, we wish we could do that, you know, and they were, and then it was in all the Florida newspapers, it was on all the local news, and my parents who live in Tampa, of course, my dad calls me and he just, I answered the phone, I'm like, what? He's like, what did you do? Oh, and I was like, and he had heard it on the radio, and it was on the local news, and then when the piece aired, I realized like how much Floridians hate Rick Scott, and they were so happy that happened. So that's one of my personal favorites as well.
That's hilarious. Yeah. Great. Well, we are at the top of the hour. Since we started a little late, I wanted to give us a few minutes for questions. Yeah. Of course, Aasif's going to want to get lunch after this. We've got a book signing. Make sure you grab a book. I think they take credit card. Perhaps even Google Wallet, who knows. So we didn't have much.
You're paying $10 with a credit card, just come on. Just give them $10.
So yeah, any questions from the audience?
Yeah, right here.
Repeat the question for...
yes. So she said, why do people agree to do interviews when they are going to get, I think you used the term, hosed? So I think people have things to say. People are passionate about what they believe. And you know, look, sometimes we are talking to people that no one else is willing to talk to. Let's face it. But sometimes I think it's honestly that people really do feel passionately about certain things. And, like going back to the Don Yeltsin thing, I don't think he realized that he was being racist. I think he thought he was being honest and like sort of revealing some kind of real honesty about the whole thing, not realizing that, what he sounded, he was coming off as a complete racist. And so I think people don't always realize how the thoughts in their head sound when they come out of their mouth, And I've had people like come. I talked to a woman once who tried to convince me that 1 in 5 Muslims was a terrorist, and then she said, "Do the math," and so I did, and it would make about 500 million terrorists or something like something. And I thought to myself, why the fuck is it taking us so long then? If we have that many people working for us, Jesus, we are the worst. But like things like that, like she did, and then she was amazed that she was getting, threats from people when that piece aired, and not from Muslims, from like liberal white people who were like, "You can't say that. That's just not true." So I think people just don't realize sometimes. Yeah. How the work? Well, I think theater is a great grounding sort of base level education in terms of acting and habit now. Even in the Daily Show, I think there is, for example, like people always think, oh, Aasif Mandvi is you're just yourself on the Daily Show, but I'm actually not myself. I consider myself playing a character who happens to have my name and a whole team of Jewish writers who travel with him wherever he goes. But no, and a green screen that he walks around with. But the thing is that is a great. It was a great education. Theater was a great place to start, and because it is, if you can do theater, it teaches you everything about how to be on television and film and stuff. You can't always do the other way. You see film actors or TV actors trying to do theater and they fail. But from theater to television, I think often is a place. It gives you the tools, So yeah, and just in terms of playwriting, like just in terms of how a scene can work and what makes. And it's great because on the Brink, I'm actually a co-producer and a writer on the show as well, and so it's been really great to be able to work with those writers on a TV show, but it's same as, and a lot of those guys are playwrights as well, as who have transitioned into television writing. In fact, a lot of the great television writers today started as playwrights. Louis Black started as a playwright. Not a lot of you knew that. That's one to grow on. There you go. Yes.
Oh, do we have one?
Is this working? Hello? Yes? Okay.
No.
So I had a question about the internship. I was actually a Google intern, and I want to say that's wildly inaccurate.
Good. Yes.
I was wondering how...
I didn't write it, by the way.
Has that sort of changed your opinion of how, like, being here today also, like, how has that affected your opinion of what Google is? And did you, like, think of it differently?
I don't see anybody doing a lick of work on this campus. I see. Here's what I've seen. I've seen volleyball. I've seen people stuffing their faces with food. Everyone's got a takeout container wherever they go. And I've seen people like just riding their bicycles and it's like a day camp. It's like a retreat.
It's like a playground for adults.
It is, yeah. Yes. I have not seen one person coding. Nowhere.
Yeah, you told him to start his computer.
Of course, the one overachieving Indian is like, I was coding. I've been coding all day. You were on Facebook. You were tweeting. I'm sitting down there right now. What did you say? Has it changed my opinion? Not one iota. No. It was a movie, and so obviously there were wild inaccuracies needed in it. To tell the story, but did you guys all have to watch the movie? It was a mandatory thing. They were like, now we will again have our next screening of the internship. You will get an F for the semester if you don't watch it.
So you had said that when you came to the UK, you obviously were not treated equally like others. did you feel like you became equal at some point, or did it take? Did you have to come to America for you to feel equal?
Did I feel like I became equal when I got to America? You haven't been in America very long, have you? I mean, look, I think there are more, from my perspective, there is much more representation of South Asians in the media and on television and in general, out there. Do we still have a long way to go in terms of that? I mean, look, at the end of the day, Hollywood still prefers white people. They're easier to light, apparently. You don't need all those gobos and things, No, but look, I mean, we are at a technological sort of milestone in the history, and this place is full of Indian people. So, I consider that a little bit of a victory.
I don't mean as a group. As
right, you don't mean, you mean me personally.
I mean you,
Here's what I did.
Yeah.
I got on TV, and then that is the great equalizer, in terms of like having a platform to be able to say things, and even like the fact that you guys are listening to me talk right now, But I don't know. I mean, in a larger cultural context, do I still deal with racism and all that stuff? Yes, absolutely. But I think, hopefully, now what I do is I just show them my Daily Show card and get right through security. Yes, right here.
Hi. So
Hi.
I'm also a child of immigrants.
Yes,
so,
good. Yeah.
Trinidadian immigrants.
Oh,
so
yeah.
West Indian, not East
Well, the
Indian.
Mystic Masur was set in Trinidad.
Yeah, Nightfall.
And I had to do a Trinidadian
yes.
accent for that movie.
Did you?
Do you do
I
a
have to
Trini
watch it.
accent?
See, don't put me on the spot.
Come
I
on.
can't
I'll do mine if you do yours.
I can't do that. I can't do it.
Cool.
So like,
Yeah, don't like to do that Trini accent now. Come on.
oh well, no.
Oh, well.
Okay, I see.
You never call to say cat where you, how you is, dog
you
how
can't
you
do a
is.
Trini accents like me.
Nice. All right.
And I also moved around a lot once I
Yeah.
moved to America. So I was wondering, did you ever reconcile all of those different pieces and parts of yourself into one single identity, or do you still think of it as like, well, there are just multiple parts to my identity? And
I think the multiplicity becomes the source of where your creativity comes from, where your power comes from, where all of that stuff comes from. I'm jealous of people who are one thing, and can identify with that one thing as them. I've never felt that, so the multiplicity and the shape-shifting has always been part of where my source of power and creativity. So I feel like, it took me a long time to realize that was a positive and not a negative, but once I got there, I realize it now. That is kind of what I do, Yeah. Good question. See, now those are the kinds of questions we're looking for. No, I'm kidding. Anybody else?
It's time for one more.
Right there.
I was wondering what your thoughts were on colorblind casting. I know that Grey's Anatomy is a show that they've mentioned. It's a thing. I was wondering if you think it's the future of casting.
Colorblind casting? Like you mean like anybody, any ethnicity can play any kind of role?
So they don't have like a typical look for the character.
Listen, that is, I think, the tapestry of sort of America. I don't think we're going to get to a place where, we will have sort of, unless maybe they could probably do it if they were adopted. I was going to say like brown parents with white kids, but you could do that in a certain scenario, But I think in terms of there are roles out there that anybody can play, like in terms of it doesn't matter what ethnicity you are. I don't think we are there yet, but I think there are still more roles for white people than anybody else, and when there's always that sort of like one role for the brown person. I was just having this conversation earlier today with someone where it was like, oh, there's like one role for a brown person and 50 roles for white people. So that still exists, and hopefully that will change. And I know that like Grey's Anatomy, and there are, Shonda Rhimes is someone who is actually pushing the boundaries of that, pushing the envelope. And this is why I've always said like we need more ethnic or at least minority, immigrant, whatever you want to call it, writers, producers, creators, out there, and people who are shaping the culture in the way that Google is, like, so that those things, because ultimately those things get reflected back into the media and into the larger society as a whole, So, I mean, let's face it, one of the reasons that I was cast in the internship as the head of the Google intern program, and I'm South Asian, is because you guys are here at Google. And so that representation needs to be shown, If that movie had been made, 20 years ago, there would have been no Google. But if it was a movie like that, it would have been a white guy in that role, playing the boss, as it were. So I think that was, for me personally, was something that I benefited from in terms of the larger cultural visibility, Yeah.
A great message to end on. We're out of time.
Okay.
We do have a book signing.
We do.
For No Landsman.
No Landsman, very
Which
good.
I think is going on sale within a couple days. We've got some early advanced copies.
Got some advanced copies. It actually goes officially on sale on November 4th. If you don't get one today, you can pre-order it on wherever pre-orders
And then
happen.
when does The Brink come out next season?
The Brink comes out next year.
Next year.
Yes, so they'll be on HBO next year. And then I'll be back on The Daily Show this fall. So
Aasif Mandvi.
thank you very much.